Welcome to this explainer. We are diving right into something you've probably felt the sting of firsthand recently. If you've walked down a grocery aisle lately, you couldn't miss it, a sudden, completely painful spike in sugar prices. And the timing? Well, it's hitting just as India gears up for its massive festive season. Today, we're going to untangle this whole thing, the complex web of agriculture, climate, and global economics driving the complexity of India's sugar market right now. To really get a grip on this, we're going to break it all down. We'll look at the festive price shock, tackle the whole ethanol scapegoat debate, and uncover the real culprits, weather, pests, and deficits. Then we'll see how the government is striking back, check in on Brazil's role as the global sugar king, and finally, face the bitter truth ahead.
So let's start with part one, that festive price shock. Why exactly are our grocery bills surging so much right now?
Honestly, it's the sheer speed of this jump that's the most alarming part. In practically the blink of an eye, just about 1 month between July and late August, retail sugar prices completely skyrocketed. We're talking a jump from around 48 or 50 rupees all the way up to an eye-watering 70 rupees per kilogram in some areas. Wholesale prices did the exact same thing. It is a massive, immediate pinch for the average consumer.
So we have to ask, why is India's sugar getting so ridiculously expensive? Look, we all know India's festive season, with heavy hitters like Dussehra and Diwali kicking off, always brings a totally predictable spike in demand for sweets. We expect that. But a normal seasonal rush, that doesn't cause a price shock this severe. We definitely have to look a lot deeper. That brings us to our second point, the ethanol scapegoat. Is this really a case of food versus fuel? Whenever sugar supplies get tight, people love to point fingers at India's E20 green energy goals. But let's actually look at the data. This is a massive shift that almost everyone seems to miss. Right now, nearly 3/4, 75% of India's ethanol actually comes from grains like maize, not sugarcane. So while ethanol diversion is absolutely a real thing, sugarcane is simply no longer the main ingredient feeding our fuel blending ambitions. It's just 25%. And, even if we look specifically at the sugar that is used for ethanol, the reality is that the actual share being diverted has completely dropped. It went from about 12% a couple of years ago down to just around 9% for the current 2025-26 season. So literally less sugar is being taken away from human consumption now than before. Both the cooperative sugar industry body and the government are entirely on the same page here. They've explicitly stated that ethanol diversion is simply not the main culprit. It's a really convenient scapegoat, sure, but the math just doesn't back it up as the primary driver of this current crisis. Which leads us to part three, weather, pests, and deficits. The real culprits. If the fuel in our cars isn't to blame for our ultra-expensive sweets, what on earth is causing this massive shortfall? The scale of the supply issue becomes super obvious when you look at the estimates. At the start of the season, everyone projected a very healthy 343 lakh metric tons of sugar. But the revised reality? A staggering plunge down to just 306 lakh metric tons. That's an 11% drop, literally wiping out 37 lakh metric tons of expected supply. This massive deficit is exactly why closing stocks just hit a 9-year low. And this drop absolutely wasn't random. Farmers faced a literal triple threat on the ground. First off, erratic monsoons triggered severe waterlogging in major producing states like Maharashtra, completely stunting cane growth. Then, biological villains showed up. In Uttar Pradesh, their dominant sugarcane variety was totally devastated by red rot disease. And if that somehow wasn't enough, pests like the top borer and black bug thrived in the dry spells, literally sucking the sap and life right out of the surviving crops. Now, let's zoom out for a second, because this isn't just an isolated domestic headache. Globally, we are staring down a projected sugar deficit of 3.3 million tons for the 2026-27 season. Because global supplies are so incredibly tight, international sugar prices skyrocketed over 16% in under 2 months. So India is getting hit with a domestic crop failure at the exact moment the global safety net is shrinking and becoming way, way more expensive. Moving to part four, the government strikes back, a multi-pronged response. Facing record-high prices and understandably angry consumers right before the festivals, the Indian government had to launch a swift counteroffensive. And they acted fast, hitting the market with a massive wave of rapid-fire regulations. First up, an outright ban on sugar exports until September 30th, just to keep domestic sugar trapped inside the country. Second, to stop any speculative hoarding, they aggressively slashed stockholding limits for bulk consumers like beverage and candy makers down to just 15 days of inventory. And third, they made a highly unusual move, allowing 10 lakh metric tons of raw sugar imports at zero duty. On top of all those trade and stock limits, they're physically pushing the industry to move faster. The government and industry bodies are advising sugar mills to kick off the new crushing season early by October 15th. The goal is super straightforward. Get fresh sugar out of the fields, through the mills, and into the market just in time for Diwali to forcibly cool down these prices. Let's look at part 5. Brazil, the global sugar king, bridging the gap. Because to fulfill that massive 10 lakh metric ton import quota so quickly, India is turning to the undisputed heavyweight champion of the sugar world. Brazil operates on a scale that is honestly hard to even comprehend. Thanks to massive, hypermodern farms, incredibly efficient mills, and crazy robust port infrastructure, Brazil supplies sugar to roughly 150 different countries. Next year alone, their estimated exports sit at an absolutely astounding 3.36 crore tons. When a giant like India suddenly has a shortfall, Brazil is one of the only countries on Earth with the sheer volume ready to step in. But why is Brazil so capable of this? The contrast between our two models is actually pretty fascinating. Yes, India is a massive producer, but we have to prioritize our own massive domestic consumption first. We basically eat most of what we grow. Brazil's model is entirely different. They have relatively low domestic consumption compared to their gargantuan output, which leaves a huge export surplus. Plus, their mills are incredibly flexible. They can easily pivot between churning out sugar for export or ethanol for fuel, all depending on what global prices are doing on any given day. Which brings us to our final section, the bitter truth ahead, the great balancing act. We've looked at the price shock, the crazy weather, the strict policies, and global trade. So what is the ultimate takeaway from all this market turbulence? It all comes back to E20 blending. Remember, this is a fuel mix of 20% ethanol and 80% petrol. India is deeply, fundamentally committed to reaching this goal. It's absolutely vital for reducing emissions and cutting down the country's massive imported oil bill. But here is the catch. Hitting those green energy goals requires an enormous amount of agricultural feedstock, which puts direct, undeniable pressure on the exact same land and water we desperately need to grow our food. Moving forward, as India's chief economic advisor has pointed out, we simply can't pursue E20 blindly. India desperately needs a highly flexible feedstock strategy. We can't just rely on sugarcane anymore. We have to lean into maize and agricultural residues. And more importantly, there has to be some serious, careful coordination between our energy policies, our food supply chains, and our incredibly precious water resources. So I'm going to leave you with a pretty provocative question to chew on. As climate change continues to make our weather more erratic and our pests more destructive, how exactly will India walk this delicate tightrope? How do we fuel the cars of tomorrow without pricing the sweets out of the festivals of today? Thanks so much for joining me for this explainer, and definitely keep this question in mind the next time you see a headline about fuel, food, or farming.